Kanto is a region that is a timeless classic. It's been featured in so many Pokemon games over the years, and we have seen it far more than any other region to date. However, even if you know Kanto like the back of your hand, I bet you don't know everything about it, which is why today we're going to be going over 10 amazing facts that you may not know about Kanto. Let's dive right in. Why don't we start with something dark, because that's always fun. In Pewter City, at the Pewter City Museum, you'll find a giant model space shuttle, and in the Gen 1 games, it is described as being the Space Shuttle Columbia, which is the name of a space shuttle in real life, or was at least. In Fire Red and Leaf Green, the space shuttle is simply described as Space Shuttle instead, and that's probably because right around the time of Fire Red and Leaf Green's release, the real-life Space Shuttle Columbia completely burned up upon re-entry to Earth during one of its missions, killing everyone on board. So it's understandable that Game Freak didn't want to allude to this tragedy, and it's a rather shocking and unfortunate reasoning for this difference between the original games and the remakes. Also within the Pewter Museum, there are some very cool things that happen here in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. If you have a Pokemon following you while walking near the Moonstone that is on display, and that Pokemon has a family member who evolves by Moonstone, the Pokemon will stop following you and begin to stare at the stone. This same thing also happens if you have a Kabutops with you and you walk by the Kabutops fossil also on display. At the beginning of the original Kanto games, you see Red on the title screen as well as during the intro when the game first begins. Well, in the Japanese Pokemon Red and Green, Red's design on both the title screen and intro actually resemble his design from the days of capsule monsters, which is what Pokemon originally started as opposed to his actual design in Pokemon Red and Green itself, which might be just an oversight, but is a really cool connection to the earliest roots of the franchise. Speaking of Red, his rival Blue also has some noteworthy details worth sharing. One of them is that he obviously becomes a gym leader in Generation 2, specifically in Viridian City. With that said, while this is probably coincidental, it is a really cool coincidence, because Viridian City gets its name from the color Viridian, which is described as a blue-green color, both colors of which are where Blue gets his names, as not only is he named Blue in the international versions of the games, but he is named Green as well in the original Japanese version, making him the literal namesake of Viridian City. One other fact about Blue that is really cool, but not really apparent most of the time, is that his canon starter Pokemon is actually Charmander. You wouldn't think that at first, considering his aforementioned names don't really match up with that, but within the data of Pokemon Red and Blue, as well as their remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green, Blue's default starter Pokemon is specified as Charmander. This is also backed up in a lot of promotional art where we see Charmander and its evolutions with Blue, and we also see this in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee as well. This is a really interesting detail into Blue's character that doesn't get highlighted that often, and it also effectively confirms that Red's canon starter is Bulbasaur, which is really interesting as well. And speaking of the player and rival characters from Generation 1, it is possible while you and Blue are picking your starters to stop the game in its tracks entirely. Within the Generation 1 games, if you hold the A button immediately after selecting a starter Pokemon in Oak's lab, it will actually halt the game entirely and prevent Blue from selecting his starter until you release the button. It's not exactly super useful obviously, but it is a cool quirk to the games that would be fun to mess around with. In an earlier video, I mentioned how the layout of Cerulean Cave has actually changed several times across the various Kanto games, but that is actually true for more in Kanto than just this area. The design of signs and doors throughout Kanto changed multiple times from Pokemon Red and Green to Pokemon Blue, and then again from Pokemon Blue to Pokemon Yellow. This might be a really small detail, but it's because it's such a small detail that makes it really interesting. The fact that Game Freak felt the need to alter such a small element of the games multiple times. I would be surprised if many people noticed this one given its relative insignificance, which is obviously why we're talking about it here. While Game Freak pays special attention to signs and doors of all things, they also made oversights in other areas. One of these is the fact that in Lorelei's room at the Elite Four, it's actually possible to find wild Pokemon in the water by fishing. The same is also true in Misty's gym in Cerulean City in Generations 1 and 2, so maybe it's more of a hidden detail than an oversight, but either way, it's really cool. This next fact is the newest on this list, and it is really cool as well, because it involves real animals being named after Pokemon. As Yoon Sayao, and I know I'm saying that wrong so I apologize, stated on Twitter, he and his fellow researchers recently discovered 3 new species of beetle, and gave them the names of Binburnum articuno, Binburnum zapdos, and Binburnum moltres, names that, according to Yoon, were chosen due to the species' rarity, mirroring that of the legendary birds of Kanto. This is obviously amazing to have real animals named after Pokemon, and I hope it continues to happen in the future. And finally, for our last fact, we have got one that is 8 facts in one. Why? Because it's my video, that's why. Also, these are all about the gyms and gym leaders of Kanto, and they're really cool, and I didn't want to leave anyone out. Okay, so starting with the Pewter Gym, there is actually evidence to suggest within this gym that Pokemon Gold and Silver actually, canonically, come after the events of Pokemon Yellow specifically. In Brock's official artwork for Pokemon Yellow, he is seen wearing a white t-shirt that he really only ever wears one other time, in Pokemon Gold and Silver. This, along with Pikachu being Red's highest leveled Pokemon and him having all 3 starters, makes a pretty strong case for this. And yeah, I am aware that Brock wouldn't have been wearing this same shirt for 3 whole years between the 2 games, but I think you get what I'm getting at, and I think it's a pretty cool connection. In the Cerulean Gym, there is actually a slip-up that is a possible look at what Pokemon was like at an earlier stage. In the original Gen 1 games, the gym guide of the Cerulean Gym makes reference to plant-type Pokemon when referring to grass types. Considering something similar also happens at the Vermilion Gym, where the flying type is described as the bird type, and we know the bird type was the early name for the flying type, maybe the grass type was once called the plant type. Who knows? Speaking of the Vermilion Gym, if you talk to the guide there in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, he will say that the gym's traps have recently been repaired after being out of order. This is actually a reference to the original Gold and Silver where the traps did not do anything. Moving along to the Celadon Gym, in the first 3 generations, the layout of the gym is actually in the shape of the female gender symbol when seen from above, which symbolizes the fact that the gym is comprised entirely of women. Meanwhile, Fuchsia's gym is notable for its invisible wall puzzle, but this is really only true in Gen 1 if you're playing on an original Game Boy. If you're playing on a Game Boy Color or Game Boy Advance, the added color will actually allow you to see the walls clearly, effectively nullifying the puzzle. One really interesting thing about the Saffron Gym is that despite being the 6th gym in the games, it's actually faced 4th by Ash in the anime. While the anime can pretty much do whatever it wants, it does call into question if maybe this was true at some point for the games as well. We have seen evidence that the anime is being worked on in tandem with the games, as this beta Darkrai being in the logo for the Rise of Darkrai movie shows, which I have talked about before. We have also seen that Kanto's gym order was different originally as well, thanks to some Ken Sugimori concept sketches, so maybe Sabrina was planned for a little earlier in the games originally, after all. With Cinnabar's gym, depending on the game you're playing, it is actually possible to face Blaine as early as the 4th gym leader in the lineup, ahead of Lieutenant Surge, Erica, Koga, and Sabrina. This has to do with the key to getting to Cinnabar Island being the Surf HM, which you can get simply by going to the Safari Zone. In most games, you do need Koga's badge before you can use it outside of battle, but in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, you are able to get the Sea Skim ability, which replaces Surf in this game, without beating Koga, which allows for this skip. And finally, for the Viridian Gym, the blocky aesthetic of this gym's interior in Generation 2 is possibly a reference to an old Nintendo product from before they made video games, known as the N and B blocks. These were basically blocks designed to compete with Legos that Nintendo put out in the 1960s, offering a very nice callback to the company's extensive history. And with that pretty much wraps up our facts on Kanto. If you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe for more, and if you'd like to support the channel further, you can do so by checking out my Pokemon remixes on Spotify, and by watching my Pokemon Cardinal series here on YouTube, both of which help out a ton and are so appreciated. With that said, I will see you all soon with another video, and until then, as always, I love you all, and I will smell you guys later.